Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to our first artist talk of the 2024-2025 season for the Harold J. Miossi Art Gallery here at Cuesta College. It's my pleasure every time I work, but especially this time, to work with local artists who are so well established in their practice and so well respected throughout the community. Working with Marie has been a real pleasure, and working with someone who has achieved such mastery in the practice of being creative and in thinking creatively has been really a workshop for me to kind of see how a creative mind develops throughout the years and continues to make artwork an amazing artwork. So Marie shows unique prints created over the past decade are deeply rooted in the act of drawing. She uses drawn marks to capture her focused observations and then translates them into dry point process. So Marie was raised in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. She attended Hunter College in New York for her MFA, and then came back here, and over the past many years has worked at Westmont College, Santa Barbara City College, and UCSB, establishing herself as one of the major art personalities in the Santa Barbara area and becoming someone who is known and respected throughout the Central Coast in Southern California and Northern California. Marie's works within the gallery and Between Ordinary have been inspiring to students and visitors alike. They've presented a new way of thinking about process of printmaking and of mark making. And so without further ado, here's Marie.
Well, thank you, Tim. I feel very humbled, but I want to thank you and the community here. Everybody's been so great, and the college, the space is wonderful, and it's been a real inspiration to work with Tim in collaborating on the installation. It was top notch, so I appreciate it. So we'll start. I'm going to kind of talk about my very beginnings and some of my background. I'll go into some technical stuff about the prints because I do feel that it's directly related to the purpose of me making them and their concepts. So hopefully there will be questions afterwards. I'm aiming for a reasonable length in which we would have a few moments for some questions. So if I don't get carried away. So here we go. So this is an area in the country, Washington, Idaho, called the Palouse. Some people may know of it. It's south of Spokane. People have heard of Spokane, but I was born in Moscow, Idaho, just over the border from Pullman to University Towns. And my great-grandparents immigrated from Germany and were pioneers in the area farming wheat. And my father grew up on that farm, and there was actually a point after he passed that my brother and I we participated in running some of the ranch. They called it a ranch. I don't know why they called it a ranch, but one of the things I love about it is this change of seasons. And so it's mostly wheat that's grown there, and so the fields on the left are summer time when everything turns brown, which is what we're familiar with here. And a lot of people in other parts of the country are thinking summer is when everything turns green, right? Or spring and summer. And then on the right, we've got fall season. And in my early art making years, I used this transition of season and the use of these hills in a lot of my work. I actually, after I was only a few months old, my parents moved from that area down to the Bay Area. I grew up mostly in Vallejo, Solano County, and spent a few years in Sonoma, and loved the hills. During the time that I was living in New York, and I would come home and visit, and I would watch the hills disappear with all of these tract homes and buildings going. It was just really sad for me. So one of the things I would do is try to get out and just do some watercolors and drawing. So drawing from life, from experience, became very important to me, even though I take a lot of photographs. Because I began to realize that as you're drawing something from life, you have an intimate relationship with it, and you learn about it visually and deeply in a way that you don't when you take a picture. You know, you take those pictures and then you look at them and go, oh, well, that's disappointing. Except for maybe Sky. She takes pictures. They're wonderful. Right? So also, I think I have this real strong sense of being part of my family's agricultural background. And also the grasses and the hills kind of bring that home to me. These are this is a pastel drawing that I did in Santa Barbara of the grasses. I think I did these out at Lake Las Caneros, for those of you who know the area. And I was doing a lot of work in pastel, teaching pastel. And even though I love to draw, and I love to draw from observation pretty realistically, I've never considered it my final studio, you know, what I show. But the process is definitely interlinked. So I went to a community college, Solano Community College, much like Cuesta here, for 2 years, and transferred to California State University, Sacramento. And that was early 70s. And Sacramento and Davis, there were some really impressive artists working there. And this is one person I studied with, and I mostly, I took as many figure drawing classes with him as I possibly could. And this is a show he had down in Blum Gallery this spring. This spring. He's in his mid to late 80s. He's still working. We saw his show at the National Gallery. So back, for years he kind of has stayed with his work, and it's been amazing to be a part of that. But this is kind of the culture I came out of. Coming from California, I did not grow up in an artistic family. We did go to museums once in a while, but this was not the major part of our life. And so California and my education there taught me to pay attention to sort of my personal narrative. There was a lot of talk during the 70s and 80s about, where I studied, we had, it was a large Chicano, the Royal Chicano Air Force was there, and so there was that sort of political aspect that was really important. I studied with Frank LaPena, who's a Native American, very active in his tribe. He passed recently. And we were all reading Carlos Castaneda. I don't know how many of you, okay. But this notion that artists are like shaman, and that we kind of are here, our gift is to present back to the world, show back to the world things that we notice that maybe other people don't notice. So I think that really has stayed as a core in my work. And as we get around to talking about my show, it's partly what the title of the show is, Between the Ordinary. And so that between world So I decided to move to New York to go to graduate school, and I'm coming from a culture like this, and who else was teaching? You know, it was a lot of figurative stuff and narrative, and then moved to New York I moved there in 1978, and minimalism, you know, had a very strong foothold, and at that point, it was just a really fabulous time to be in New York, and moved to Tribeca. So the loft that we lived in Tribeca this is the view out our window, and the building on the left is the World Trade Towers, one of the towers. So we were 4 blocks from there. Eventually moved down to Soho, and the building that we lived in on Broadway is the red one illustrated here. We had the top floor, 5th floor, walk up, no heat. We had the roof, you know, so it was, and I went to school at Hunter, and Hunter has been known, it's become known as the color school, at least for a number of decades. And this is a picture of Sandy Wormfield, who I studied with, one of the painters I studied with, and I remain in touch with him. He was chairman of the department, and he's this, describes himself as an amateur color theorist, but he, you know, it's remarkable what he does with color. Just to give you an example, he's standing in front of part of his cyclorama. And so the cyclorama is a circular structure that is painted. It's 360 degrees. And this on the left is a detail similar to, this is from a different painting, but it's a similar detail of the whole painting. So it's all done on color grid, taping. He figures out all these different color transitions, and you can imagine how time-consuming this is. It's remarkable. And so I'm going to a school where they're painting squares. And I'm like, well, you know, okay. I mean, I sort of knew that people did work like that, but nothing this extreme. And I always kind of wondered why they accepted me into the department. But I think they wanted some variety. But anyway, it's a remarkable thing to experience these paintings that they're not telling a story. And people still have a hard time after all these years of, you know, abstraction, you know, over 100 years, to understand how you can experience something like this, where he's, you know, stripped it down to pure color. You can see here, he's on the platform, and in front of him is this stairway that you have to walk up, and then you can be immersed in it. And he's made a number of these and exhibited them. So, I mean, the big thing here I want to talk about is just the difference of cultures. And ultimately, I feel like I'm kind of part of 2 worlds. This is another painter I studied with who passed away a few years ago, Ron Gorchoff, who definitely came out of the abstract expressionist, you know, that's where he grew up from. And these are more poetic in a different way. You can see the mark of the hand, the expressionism, and he frequently was using these kind of what I call eccentric forms, these dual forms. But one of the things that he's known for is his saddle-shaped canvases that he designed and had made. And so if you look at the structure of the canvas, it's concave and convex at the same time. I mean, it goes this way and then it goes this way. At this time, there was this great emphasis on pushing, you know, with Frank Stella and others, Elizabeth Murray, pushing painting outside of, off of the picture plane, right? And it coming into space and being, is it sculpture, is it painting? So now I have just a couple of pictures of some old paintings that I always visited when I went to the Met, and when I go to New York and go to the Met, I still like to go visit these paintings. And so this is a painting done 1435. You may be familiar with this artist. And there's all this art historical back and forth about who actually painted this. Was this, they call him the Osterwanzer master, but aside from that, you know, I'm not even sure why I go back to these paintings. I do know that, and on one hand, you know, it's in that historic time between real good, you know, sort of high Renaissance perspective, and still attached to that pre-Renaissance. And I love that there's a mixture. There's a little bit of realism, and yet then, you know, there's this saint with a halo. That the halo is, you know, like everything else you might see, but would there really be a halo on his head? And sort of that symbolism and that change of reality. I also think that the way that the sky is treated, the skies frequently in this era of painting is not of importance, or not emphasized as much, and you can kind of see the curvature of the earth. This is another painting that I just think is wacky, you know. So this is, what, 100 years later, almost, 1513, a German artist, much more realistic Renaissance, but you know, it's like a photograph, right? 1500. It's like this artist was showing us a picture of what the story of the ascension of Christ would have been, as if it was this real thing with the camera that you would capture in real life. And depending on your beliefs, you know, whether this was real, whether this is, you know, a metaphor or what, it just really struck me and every time I look at this painting, I just think it's pretty wild. I mean, the whole figure's off the picture plan. This is a lot of formal stuff, but that sort of, things don't match up. You know, it's not this clear system. Just to introduce, and I actually thought there would be a ton of students here that didn't know my husband, but a lot of you know my husband. His name is Dave Goodman. He's sitting here, and this is just an example of his work, and which is quite different from mine. But I wanted to kind of give you a sense. This was a show he had at Creative Studies pre-pandemic. And this is a wonderful piece of his called Rank and File, with the close-up. I think you can see that piece of wood is, he collects our Christmas trees and makes sculptures out of them. And the faces in the back are painted on cereal bags. So very much interested in things that are around in the everyday world and using materials that are at hand, you know, not traditional art materials. And this, some of you may have seen this exhibition at Westmont College that he collaborated with Keith Puccinelli. That was 2015, and this is called Tug. This is this huge tugboat. How tall? 20 feet?
It's 25 feet long and
12 feet tall, 25 feet long. And the material is cellophane and duct tape. And, you know, it's no longer with us. But, you know, it's quite striking. And again, both he and Keith were very interested in just sort of day-to-day materials. So here we are now, and I put in these installation shots in case people haven't seen the show. As Tim said, these prints from about the last 10 years, and I don't think of myself as a printmaker, and I didn't even realize I'd worked in prints that long. And one of my colleagues that I met inside that 10-year time period, I said, well, I'm not a printmaker. And he looked at me like, well, that's all I know of your work. You know? And then the drawings. So the printmaking, I came to, I have, well, okay, my slides are directing me. So this was shot, can you all hear me? Sorry. The exhibition at Westmont was called Amplifying the Between. And this particular piece that you're looking at was entitled Between Ordinary. And I decided to use that title for the exhibition here. And you may recognize some of that green color on the surface platform, the little pedestals that Tim so cleverly designed some wonderful pieces to give them a different presence. And for me, that is wonderful because I put these on this wall, this hanging wall, to kind of put them in a different realm. And now they're not on a wall, they're flat, but they're also kind of part of it. They have that feeling of my work, so I appreciate that. So the piece, when you enter the museum, the image on the far right, you would see face up, which is in our gallery here. And then on the back was the screen wall. And if you look carefully, you can see some oval shapes, ellipses that are painted in a lighter green, and those shapes are directly opposite the print on the other side of the wall. So the between is between these two pieces in my concept kind of represent these, two different possibilities of experience. The part that says ordinary, that to me, in the church, in the Christian church, in some liturgical churches, there's a strong designation between ordinary time and other times. Anybody who's Catholic might know this, or other denominations. But so green represents ordinary time. And so what is ordinary time? I mean, our ordinary days, for me, they can hold very special moments. And I think that it's important for us to kind of experience that and appreciate that. And in doing my drawings, that's one of the aspects where I sit in nature, or I sit in front of something and I closely observe it. And it's kind of paying honor to whatever it is I'm looking at. So ordinary time is sort of bookended between the special times, Christmas and Easter. And if you take away the religious aspect of it, we can still think about our day-to-day life and those experiences in our lifetime that are important to us, that are not ordinary, that it's so important for us to celebrate and acknowledge. So I'm kind of going there. You can see off in the back corner, well, you'll see this drawing. I showed this drawing at Cuesta College shortly after it was made in the 90s, the big drawing. So I'm going to talk about drawing. This is one of my favorite artists in terms of drawing, George Seurat. And I love his paintings, but the drawings are so incredible. I personally am interested in experience art that has a sense of ambiguity, and I'm interested in making work that's ambiguous, meaning that you maybe recognize something, not necessarily. So it opens up your imagination. It has you, it asks you questions. It makes you wonder, you know. This particular drawing of Seurat's, for me, you can kind of blur your eyes and just see these light and dark shapes. It's a vase with flowers, but it can be other things. And there's this emphasis on the black and the white, the emphasis on light and form, which is something in my earlier drawings in charcoal, I was always interested in tone. And he's not using lines. There's a sense of quiet and wonder to it that I really admire and very moved by. So after years of teaching drawing and drawing itself, I learned from my students and the practice of teaching that the whole blind contour lesson puts everybody into this meditative state. And so I kind of took off from that and used that as sort of a meditative process. And this is just a little statement which I'll read. So drawing as meditation, and it's a portal to thin spaces. When drawing what I see, I feel intensely connected to our material world where the object resides. Yet I'm simultaneously elevated. I sense I'm between the ordinary and the sublime. And so making art, at its best times, does that, transports me, and I think it does that for a lot of artists. And hopefully the experience of the viewer is similar, that there's some sort of elevation of experience. Thin spaces refers to Celtic Christian concept that a thin space is between heaven and earth, or some sort of sacred experience and the earthly. And it's just a wonderful, I love the term thin space. And I think perhaps many of us have experienced being in a thin space where your consciousness totally changes, is transformed and it can happen in different ways at different times. So for me, drawing as a process, the process is important. It's more important than the piece. The piece becomes a byproduct of that experience. And so it's about really slow seeing and careful looking and intense looking, and then whatever it is you're looking at, and I experience this a lot when I'm drawing the figure. That's where I realized it in working with my students, that if you're making a drawing, a 10-minute drawing, you have an experience with that figure that's 10 minutes long. And so you see like 10 minutes worth of stuff. You make a drawing that you go for 4 hours, and pretty soon you are seeing things that you could never see any other way. And that, it's like, I would have never known this about what I'm seeing had I not spent the time doing that. So that's what drives these drawings, and the round drawings. And then this is what I kind of take and translate into prints. 2 decades ago, during Lent, I started to, instead of giving up chocolate, which nobody wants to do, I don't want to do, or I don't even believe necessarily that that's worthwhile, but to focus my intentions inward and make drawings that put me in a meditative space, that kind of let me appreciate the more ethereal part of our life. That last paper is handmade paper. For several summers I worked out at UCSB making paper with Sandra Reese, and then on my own. This is also handmade paper. And so most of these that you're seeing are Every year, I'll sort of pick a different place or pick a different object, and for a particular time period, that's all I do, is make those drawings. This is a drawing that's one of the frame drawings in the show, and just to give you sort of information about what I was looking at. There's a huge boulder on Westmont campus, and I did a lot of my printmaking there. Spent, oftentimes I do a residency with a couple of colleagues. We'd be up there for weeks at a time, 3-4 weeks maybe. But I did a whole group of drawings of this boulder that while I was drawing it, a geologist from UCSB came and started telling me the history and how old it was. It's thousands of years old. He was talking about where it came from, And there was also one of faculty members told me that supposedly it's a Chumash sacred site, and that at one point you could see some drawings on it. So these marks are my time spent with this amazing boulder, our natural world, and one that was acknowledged by other people as being sacred. This is a pandemic drawing, 2020, and I did these out there's a field behind our home and studios, and again, I'm returning to the grasses, and this springtime is it just takes me someplace. I think where we spend our life is really important. I think, I would even take it as far as where I was born, marks who I am and what I appreciate. And so it's one reason I like keeping our back field wild, which is grasses, because it feels like just a part, it's California, it's, for me, it's reminiscent of Washington. It looks like Santa Barbara, it looks like San Luis Obispo. And so this is my setup, and I go out there, and I like this photo because I think it's funny. That's a circular piece of paper that I was wanting the watercolor to dry fast, so I just sort of tossed it like a frisbee to land on the top of the grass so it would catch the sun. And it becomes an ellipse, which is a shape that I like to use. Here it just gives you a little bit of a close-up of some of my paper that I've handmade and a little bit of the texture. So back in the 80s, I was doing large charcoal drawings. This is a 13-foot drawing. Ironically, I don't know if it's ironic, but it's called The Sin. In these works, I was frequently showing what you might imagine as landforms. And then the sky, abstracted. So the land, the earth kind of has always represented this sense of gravity. We're held to the earth, and yet we walk through the earth, and there's other experiences, and then, obviously we have outer space and, other sort of more spiritual thinking about what is beyond this grounding on the earth. So one thing you'll notice in the prints is the prints that we have here, there's no horizon. There's purposely no horizon. And the one piece is called Face Up. So I'm interested in sort of, what does that gesture mean? When you look up, what do you see? How is it? And it has many, many, for everybody it might be something different. So I'm interested in having people kind of put themselves in another place. And I love, back when I was doing the charcoal only drawings, I started using pastel, and I didn't pick those because they were ancient. But when after a while, I realized how fabulous it was that I was using materials like those people over 17,000 years ago who were making drawings on the wall. You know? And I remember it was shortly after moving here from New York that I was in my studio and I had these pieces of paper on the wall, and I was beginning, you know, and I wasn't living in Soho surrounded by a bunch of artists who were doing the same crazy thing. So I'm living next door to my friends who are here, and just kind of a normal neighborhood, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. I am in my studio, converted garage studio, and I'm making pictures, and I'm pushing all this charcoal into a paper to make a picture. And what is this about? I mean, I truly was, you know, questioning. And that's when I started reading Carl Jung, and one of his things was that, and this has always stuck with me, and it kind of talked me down off the ledge of, like, you know, how you are when you're an artist and you get to that point. Man is innately, humans are innately image makers. And sort of the proof of that is our dreaming life, our dream life. We dream, we make images constantly, and that becomes part of how we process the world. So this is a large drawing, which I actually showed here at Cuesta College in the early 90s, years ago. And I had it in the retrospect as well. It's charcoal on, and I moved into using color on the paper. Working on this kind of very interested in just sort of pushing the pigment into the paper to kind of stain it. So it wasn't a traditional use of pastel where all the pigment sits on the top. But here we have a division. So there's kind of that earth form and then this other vapor form and a division. So I'm kind of speaking of two different realities, two different realms. The title From M to Me to Mine refers to M is the first letter of my mother's name, and then me, which my first name starts with an M, and then mine. And I was pretty much thinking, how did that happen? Of sort of the passage of time between generations, and you know, it was a time when my daughter was very young, and I was thinking about motherhood, and that, you know, sort of new generation of life. This is another piece from that time period called Gift. I'm not sure how many of you have heard my talk before, but how many people know the story about the county building in this piece? So I'll tell this. The County of Santa Barbara purchased this for their collection. I think it was Phyllis Klaus, who was director at the UCSB Art Museum at the time. And they installed it in the stairway going up in the building department where you go get your building permit. And it was a very tight stairway, and this is a big drawing. And so when you came up the stair, it was like right in your face, and then you'd go up another flight. And Rita Ferry, I think it was, who was kind of in charge of this, called me one day and said, you know, some people weren't happy about having to look at this. And they put brown paper over it. They covered it with brown paper and started writing things. There was this conversation, written conversation going on, this brown paper over my drawing. that people didn't like it. Why do we have to look at this? And then other people would chime in and say, I think it's wonderful, and blah, 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 you know. I threw the paper away. I should have kept it. So, I don't know. I mean, this group of work that I did, people frequently saw or had a sense of the female form in there. And I think it was maybe touching, perhaps. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, it's kind of like the Georgia O'Keeffe thing, you know, she's making pictures of flowers that also happen to have reproductive parts because that's what flowers do, and yet people bring to that their own interpretation. I don't know. Wouldn't go either. So that, you know, I thought of all the work. I mean, this is not Serrano's is Christ, which, you know, I have no problem with. I think it's, you know, it's opposite of what people think, but anyway. How, which one is it? Okay. I'll keep moving. Getting to the last. I like to experiment with different materials. This is silver point, and I'm showing this because the form, there's a female form-ish there, and it relates to paintings, which I haven't painted in a long time, but there's somewhat of a thread here that of this notion of spinning and floating. And these skirts, flowers, skirts, and some of that shows up. Also, one of my fields is in the lower reference to the Golden Hills. So I started printmaking, working with Larry Fodor, an artist who had a workshop in New Mexico. And this is just a simple monotype. You blacken the plate with, and it's wet ink, and then I was subtracting the light colors out, similar to how I made my my charcoal drawings. And this was a one of two prints that Leslie Sutcliffe here in Morro Bay that we worked on together. Thank you very much. And it's a mock mezzotint, so but it's tonal, and I was, you know, this is 95, and I was still working on more tonal things. Here's just an illustration of how I make the plates for, oh, I forgot the plate. I'll do it again. Using plexiglass and making the dry point marks, rather than using a traditional copper plate, I'm using plastic, and in order to get a larger scale on the line and more energy, I tried using the soldering iron, because I can get a bolder arc. So this is just me wiping the plate and showing for people who are not familiar with printing. And this will give you a sense of the process of these multi-sheet pieces. So this is the first stage of face-up, and so each piece I would kind of run through and I'd start, and you'll see, like, if you look at these two little circles, when we go back, oops, they started out at the top, and after I started adding more material, sometimes it would need a different composition, so I could turn it. So it's kind of an improvisational thing that builds, and sometimes I'm putting the piece up, and maybe I'm putting up tissue paper to see, well, the shape here work, or, you know. But it really is a building process, and each piece, I'd say at an average, they go through the press 5 times, and some pieces more. That the second piece over, if I count it, it goes through, I went through 7 times. So it gets quite complicated, and I've always entered into working with printmaking because I wanted to use sort of a low tech, and that's why I do the dry point, because it's drawing, you don't have to use chemicals, you don't have to, you know. And then I found myself creating these complicated puzzles of trying to put together all these pieces and trying to register them, and just to kind of, I guess, I upped the ante. But my colleagues, this is one of my favorite parts. I don't know what's happening. This is what we call a print miracle, because I wanted those 2 shapes to kiss, and they are. And, you know, to predict that, to make that happen, is very difficult because you're doing a lot of guesswork, and if you've ever tried to do any registration on printmaking, you would know that printmaking doesn't always come out the way you planned, and that's part of the joy. So these are the larger long pieces, and I'll just say something about the titles here. This is called Pixie Babies. So each one of these plates that either has lines in it, either white lines that I've brayered over, and the lines themselves did not receive ink, and so they come out white, or the other ones that I wiped more traditionally with the black, are maybe I've taken drawings from sketchbooks and blown them up on the Xerox machine, and then used those to trace, to burn the plate from. And so this is a very important concept to me, that each thing that is drawn with line represents me experiencing that, whatever it was. And sometimes so that I sat in the world, and this is what I saw, and this is where I was, and, you know, this is part of the world. So for me personally, that's really important. Sometimes I make choices to only use, in these I was experimenting with being less ambiguous, and maybe seeing some floral forms. I wanted these to be a little more joyful than some of my other work. And so the pixie is about pixies who are part of Irish culture, are these mischievous creatures that come and wreak havoc or bless you or do whatever they do. But they're from another place, they're from another realm, and they come to Earth and they're there. And so each culture has these characters that go between worlds. You know, we have Bodhisattva, who decides to stay here rather than reach full enlightenment, because they're kind of in both worlds. Shaman are humans that do that. They have contact, they have some sort of special contact, and I think that's what, you know, artists do. So I have, in this installation, I have 3 of these 7. Originally, this is like a set of 7, that each piece represents a day, so I'm kind of interested in a sense of time. Just one day at a time. It's a week. On these pieces, if you look at the ones in the gallery, they do have a common thread in that there are a set of lines. In this piece, you'll see the white lines at the bottom. In this piece, you see the same lines, but they're in black. So each one, this one, they're very faint. So I used the same plate, and I ran about 12 different sheets of paper, and then I built on those. So that's the only thing they have in common, is that one plate that I reused. And this is a drawing of my daughter I made when she was 9 years old, so, to give you a sense of my drawing style and see how cute she is. And this is one of my favorite images that I usually show in my talks. This was a creation that my daughter made when she was about 4, and she was constantly doing this in the yard, everywhere. And to me, it just represented this amazing thing that all human beings have, this urge to create order, an urge to make things that either have patterns or they represent things, and that, you know, whether you become an artist or not, I think everybody has this in them. And so I just think this is just an amazing thing. Here's this circle with this little seed pod in the center. I mean, such an archetypal symbol, you know, without, you know, a 4-year-old. So, and then this is just from Carl Jung. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of our mere being. So that's, you know, my hope that we don't lose contact with art and artists. That's it. Questions?
Are there any questions for Marie?
Oh, way up in the back.
Oh, yeah, please, just go ahead and count them.
What about from 1980, the large drawings, where the charcoal, where are those now?
Well, there's one in the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and the big ones are rolled up in storage. So if anybody has a home for them, I would be very happy to find a home for them. Yeah, so some of them, you know, I had several shows, and some of them that went into private collections. Others I still have. You have a large wall.
Other questions?
What are you currently working on?
Oh, I took those slides out, but I'm playing around with something entirely different. I'm working with a traditional Japanese process called sumigashii, which is a marbling technique, but I'm trying to do something different with it. And so it's just been a lot of fun. So the thing about that I like is it's really a printmaking process, because you have water and you put ink on it, and then you put the paper on it and you lift it, and so that's your print, right? But the print, instead of being on a plate, the print is on water, and I love that concept. So much of my work, I'm purposefully kind of dealing with the atmosphere and sky and not the earth. So this I like, because conceptually it sort of ties in, you know, it's water, and so I like that. I have no idea what's going to happen, but it's enjoyable. Mary?
How much regular real-life study drawing do you still do? On like a daily or weekly or monthly basis?
Well, it really varies. I retired from teaching a few years ago, and then I've had a lot of medical issues, which have made working, especially on that scale, much more difficult. So I'm hoping that I'm, you know, I have been working on these small works on paper. I'm in the studio. Maybe I'm preparing for the show, and you know, I'm starting to get a pattern down now that I'm not teaching, and I'm not totally incapacitated. So I try to put in at least a few hours in the afternoon, you know, every day. Well, Monday through Friday. Doesn't always work. And some days I'm in there longer, and it kind of depends on what you count studio. You know, anything studio related, you know, goes for a while.
The prints that are on exhibit right now, so some of them, your circles or ovals are a plate was pressed on, and then other circles and ovals that don't look embossed. Were those done to the template?
Well, they're all done with the same kind of plate, so I ink it in a different way. So the ones that have lines, let's say it's a circle with lines, you rub the ink over where I've made a line in the plastic, and that's what holds the ink, and then you wipe away everything else around it. So when it prints, you only see the lines. You will see where the edge of the plate is. So you might call that part a blind emboss. And there are, sometimes I'll put a plate down with no ink and just run it through the press so it loses shape. Does that answer your
So
question?
then all the ovals had, or circles had a plate on them?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah, some of them look, I mean, it doesn't, the paper isn't,
Oh,
embossed.
embossed, yeah, or debossed. Partly, let's say if I run, by the end of running it through the press 5 times, you lose some of the embossing. And when I'm pressing them, if I've used paper that I had to wet, I press it to keep it flat, and then you lose the embossing, which is a shame, because when you run it through the first time in the paper I use, it's just beautiful. So it's one of the things.
And then also, so there's one that appears to have an image of a face with his cyst next to him.
Yeah.
And in the other prints, are there other images in there, or is everything just random?
Well, there are images in there, but I purposefully disguise them a little. And so if you see it, or if I tell you what it is, you might recognize the hand. I'll take, well, let's say for instance the boulder that I showed you the drawings, I've made plates from those shapes. Well, those shapes are kind of abstract, so you're not going to understand that that's from a boulder. Other things are, you know, there are floral images that I purposefully was experimenting with, showing them more. So it's that ambiguity that I'm playing with, so that you maybe see it and recognize it, maybe you don't. Yeah. Yes.
You have demonstrated that you have skills in a lot of different techniques. You have charcoal drawings, you have paintings, you have all kinds of representation in different styles of printmaking. So please share with us, which of those is your favorite child?
Well, it's probably just straight drawing, but you know, I have a strong desire to go back to painting. They each demand a little different thing, and when I was doing them, you know, some of those charcoal drawings I feel like are some of my best work, and some of the paintings are my best work. And in terms of concept and subject matter, they were very demanding out of sort of my psychology and pulling things out, and it gets kind of exhausting working that way. But I feel like I'm at a time in my life when I I'm ready to go back to that, a more interior sort of exploration. So, yeah, I like it all. But drawing, I mean, if the only thing I could do was draw, then I would just draw. Any kind of drawing.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I've got one. I didn't want to hog the floor. But so on your husband, there were a couple of pieces of your husband's, and you mentioned using ordinary materials, not anything fancy. And the first one, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but it looked to me like stuff that would end up in the trash otherwise.
Yes.
And so was that part of the reason for using that?
Well, you mean the term ordinary, or just in his work? Yeah, I mean, he likes to use work, well, subject matter frequently is about our day-to-day life, his day-to-day life, and exploring, I mean, he could answer, but it's, yeah, it's definitely a statement in a way that you don't need, I mean, he's done these wonderful carvings out of soap, bars of soap. So there's, you know, like the difference between high art, what's called high art, and, you know, low art. I mean, you know, graffiti is considered low art, you know, even though, or artists who haven't gone to school are outsider art, thank you. You know, in their work. I mean, it's kind of like those earlier paintings that I showed you that are kind of wacky, you know. It's art, you know, and it comes from a different place. And so there's just, you know, he purposely is interested in using that day to day. Am I right?
Yeah. I think the thing is about paying attention to what's in front of you. I mean, you really honor in the spiritual life. It's like everything should be available for art, and there's no hierarchy. I mean, the art world kind of makes it, you know, so you can make things out of tinfoil and paint on the inside of cellophane bags. It's just as worthy as anything else, and it doesn't have to last forever, like the book.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, Marie. That was
Well, thank you.
amazing. Really appreciate it. It's always wonderful getting a chance to kind of peek behind the curtain and understand an artist's background, the work they're coming from, what's really inspired their acts of creation. Now's my chance to get to say my thank yous. So I want to thank Marie for being our artist to open up the 24-2025 school year. It's a pleasure to get to show students such an accomplished artist. I want to thank the Harold J. Miossi Trust for making the gallery possible. They endow us and allow me to be the person who says yes to artists like Marie. Thank Cuesta College for housing us here. It's a really amazing place, and the art department here is unique in the most miraculous way. I want to thank the two people who helped me make the gallery run. Bo Burnham, who is our prep, who comes in and helps to make the shows as amazing as they look, and Magnolia Stork, who does all the work behind the scenes to make sure our artists get paid and to make sure the gallery keeps running. So they are really important to us. So I want to do one quick pitch for our next show that's coming up, which is called Outsiders from the Other Side. It's featuring 9 artists from Tijuana, Mexico. So speaking of outsider artists, honoring all types of materials, that show is going to feature a lot of that stuff, and that opens on the 28th of August. So I hope to see you all then. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Yeah.
they got